Hey everyone, my name is Miguel Quiles, and in today's video I'm going to give you my initial thoughts and impressions having had first-hand experience using the Canon 5DSr and the upcoming Sony A7R II. And I decided to shoot this video because I realized that there weren't too many people that had actually used both cameras. I had the opportunity to used the Canon 5DSr a few months ago and actually got to shoot a number of frames with it. And I also had the opportunity to attend the Canon, or rather the Sony A7R II press conference in New York a few weeks ago. And so I had the opportunity to use the camera while I was there. Also had a chance to use the camera at the Adorama Street Fair, which was the same camera that we used at the Sony press conference. So I got to use both cameras, got to play with both, hold it in my hands, and decided that maybe I would be able to share some of my experiences with you in regards to using both cameras and just kind of shed some light on some of the differences between the two cameras, some of the differences that I think are the big differences with these cameras. And so I wrote some notes here on a piece of paper that you can't see off screen. I'm going to refer to these because I wanted this video to just really be almost just a conversation. You know, I'm just sitting here, we're just talking. There's not going to be too much prep involved. So anyway, it's going to be a very nitty-gritty, down and dirty type of video, but let's get right into it. So again, a few months ago I had the opportunity to shoot with the Canon 5DSr, used it for a headshot session. And at the time, my intention and my thought was I wanted to use the Canon 5DSr and put it up against my Sony A7 II. And now you're probably thinking, that's crazy. Why would you want to do that? It's 50 megapixels compared to 24 megapixels. Of course it's going to look better. And to be honest with you, I wasn't that impressed. The image quality, yeah, the files were a lot bigger. So hypothetically, you could print them a little bit bigger, but in terms of the image quality that you would be giving to your clients, whether it's going to be delivered on the web or even for regular size printing, you're going to find that the A7 II actually performs very well. But this video is not about the A7 II, it's about the A7R II. But I just wanted to let you know that was my original intention in using the camera, was to try to do like a head-to-head comparison. And unfortunately, I was working with a client at the time and we really didn't have too much time to be able to play around like that. Had some work to do, so still got the opportunity to see the files and do some pixel peeping and things like that. But anyway, so let me talk to you about some of the reasons and some of the different comparisons that I think would be worthwhile to note between the two cameras. And the first thing is the resolution. So with the Canon 5DSr, you have a 50.6 megapixel sensor against the A7R II, which is a 42.4 megapixel sensor. And so, you know, you look at that and you say, wow, so you have an extra, 8.2 megapixels with the Canon. So it's got to be better, right? Like the resolution's got to be better. And I put together this little graphic, which I'm going to throw up on the screen really quickly. And it's going to compare the actual dimensions of the file coming from an A7R II compared to a Canon 5DSr. And you'll notice that even though on paper it seems like 8.2 megapixels is a lot, it's not really that big of a difference between the two images. They're both very large images, very large files. And I don't think that the average person is going to see that big of a difference. And you can see it visually represented there. I created two files in Photoshop so that you know how I did this. Took the megapixel file size, so the Canon was 8,688 by 5,792. That's what 50.6 megapixels boils down to. And then on the A7R II, you have 7,952 pixels by 5,304 pixels. And I just overlaid the A7R II size on top of the Canon 5DSr, and you'll see that there's not that big of a difference in terms of the actual image size that's being created by these two cameras. So for somebody who's looking primarily for the highest resolution possible, and that's all they're looking at, and you take everything else off the table, even still you look at it and it's not that big of a difference. So I thought the visual representation might be something that might be a little bit eye-opening for people, because sometimes it's hard to quantify what these megapixel numbers mean, and so I wanted to show you guys that. I pixel peeped images from the 5DSr, which at 50 megapixels they look great, and I pixel peeped the images when I was over at the Sony release event for the A7R II. One of the Sony artisans, Brian Smith, was shooting, and the images were being fed into a monitor, and you could zoom into the files and take a look at them, and the quality was amazing. I mean, it's obviously 42 megapixels. It's a lot of image quality. It looks amazing, and I think for the pixel peepers out there, you will be very, very happy to see what this camera is capable of doing, especially when you put it in terms of everything else that it does. It's just amazing. So we'll talk about that, but as far as resolution goes, I wanted to put those two things up against each other and really just show you that there really isn't that big of a difference between the two. The second thing is your ISO. So the ISO really just kind of confuses me, because the Canon 5DSr native ISO is 100, so ISO 100 to ISO 6400. 6400, okay? The Sony A7R II native is 100 to 25,600 ISO. All right, so I don't know, I just don't get it. You have a camera that is supposed to be the king of kings when it comes to DSLR cameras, 50.6 megapixel sensor, and then you have your ISO, the max native ISO is 6400. It's just not super impressive compared to the A7R II, that native goes up to 25,600. And if you look at the expanded ISO capability, so this is kind of the highest ISO capability of the A7R II, goes up to 102,400, and on the 5DSr it goes up to 12,800. So it's a huge difference in terms of the sensor technology that's in the A7R II, that not only gives you 42.4 megapixel image files, but that also gives you the capability of having just the crazy high ISO for the camera. So in terms of the ISO, it's definitely something that the camera, the 5DSr, is really made, I think, it's just my opinion having used the camera, but it's meant more for like a studio photographer that's going to be shooting at ISO 100 or ISO 200. It's not kind of that all-around camera to me. I kind of felt that same way when I used the camera. I just felt like I was using it in a studio environment with studio lighting, and it felt like it was at home in that environment. But for a wedding shooter or somebody who's shooting out on location, the ISO capabilities kind of leave me wanting for a little bit more. So it's definitely a big advantage for the A7R II. The other thing is the stabilization, and rather the lack thereof in terms of the Canon 5DSr. There's no in-body image stabilization compared to the A7R II, which has the same 5-axis image stabilization that the A7 II offers in its camera body. And if you go to SLR Lounge, slrlounge.com, I wrote an article back in, I want to say it was December, for the A7 II, and took some images at very low shutter speeds handheld, and they still came out crazy sharp. So having that in-body image stabilization built into the A7R II, on top of the ISO capabilities, on top of the 42.4 megapixel resolution for the photos, very impressive. And the fact that you can adapt and use other lenses, which I'll talk about that in a little bit, but being able to use other lenses and still have stabilization, to where on a Canon that either A, would not be an option using some other lenses, or B, if you could use them, they're not going to be stabilized unless the lens was stabilized. I think that's definitely a big advantage for the A7R II. The other thing, which kind of was very disappointing was the video capabilities on the 5DSr. So you have 1080p video and you have internal 4K video with the A7R II. So, I mean, I guess I kind of wasn't expecting internal 4K with the Canon. It would have been kind of interesting to see that. But to be honest, I can't say that I was expecting them to come out with something like that. But at the same time, you look at the price of the Canon 5DSr and you're paying almost $4,000 for the camera body in 2015, and it still doesn't have any kind of internal 4K. I don't care, even a GoPro for $500 has 4K. And to have a $4,000 camera that doesn't offer, you know, even a external 4K recording option, it's slightly disappointing. And I imagine at some point Canon might come out with something that will have internal 4K, and chances are it's probably going to be $5,000–$6,000 compared to the A7R II. You know, $3,200, $3,199, and it has internal 4K. So just huge leap forward, I think, for the person that's looking to buy one camera that is going to do most anything that you would want it to do. It does great photos. In this case, you have great video quality, almost ahead of its time in a way, because there's still a lot of people that don't even have 4K TVs or 4K monitors. But it's nice to know that you're buying a camera in 2015 that still has some growing room. So definitely a huge advantage for the A7R II is the fact that you can shoot 4K video. The other thing, which people don't get this, but the size and weight is huge. It's a huge advantage. And I hear people all the time saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It is a big deal. It's a huge deal. I've been shooting with the Canon 5D Mark III, and before that the 5D Mark II, pretty much for the last 3 years, up until I started and switched over to Sony. And I remember doing photo shoots that were 3–4 hours long, where I'm holding a 5D Mark III with a, let's say, the 85 1.2, which was one of my favorite lenses at the time. And I mean, after a full day of shooting, my arms are hurting, my back is hurting, my neck hurts. Just, it's one of those things that when you're using the camera very often and for extended periods of time, and you're doing it handheld, eventually you start to, like, you feel it. Your shoulders hurt, just, you feel it. The fact that you're holding this camera, you have to keep it up to your face the whole time, so any amount of weight difference makes a big difference, in my opinion. It makes a big difference. And so you're looking at 2 pounds. It's 2.05 pounds for the 5DSr. And you're looking at 1 pound 6 ounces for the Sony A7R II, and that is with the battery and the memory card loaded into the camera. I tried to look online to see if I could find whether or not the 2 pounds represented the weight of the camera with a memory card and with a battery, and I couldn't find that, unfortunately. But I can tell you again, from having used both cameras and having held both in my hand, there is a substantial difference in terms of the size, the form factor, the weight between the A7R II and the 5DSr. So again, a huge advantage, and you may not feel that in the beginning, but the more that you shoot with the camera, the more that you have to travel with the camera, you'll definitely see the difference of the size and the weight and the form factor of the A7R II. I mean, I switched from the Canon 5D3 to the A7 II, which essentially has the same body and the same style as the A7R II. So, you know, the weight and everything, I imagine, is going to be very similar to the A7 II. So again, huge advantage in terms of size and weight, with no compromise in terms of video quality, because again, 4K versus 1080p. No compromise in terms of ISO performance. You're actually getting much higher ISO performance out of the A7R II. And also not that much of a compromise in terms of resolution. Again, seeing the difference between the two. And the fact that you get 5-axis in-body image stabilization, which is huge. All of this in a lighter, smaller package. All right, so I'm just trying to help you guys keep note, and I'm keeping myself in line and in check here as I go through these points. The other thing is the price. And I kind of talked about that a little while ago, but the Canon 5DSr body only is $38.99 at retail, and you're looking at $31.99 for the A7R II, so it's a $700 difference. Now, what are you getting? And again, I struggled really hard to try to see what is the advantage that I'm getting a 5DSr if I presumably was going to get one over the A7R II. Well, you have, so they say, you have more lenses that you can choose from. However, you will find that the A7R II can use Canon lenses, and it has faster autofocus compared to its prior Sony Alpha sibling. So it's almost a null point to say, well, Canon has more lenses, because all your lenses belong to us with these adapters. You can use Canon lenses on the A7 II, the A7R, A7R II. You can use them using adapters. And now with the A7R II, you can actually autofocus almost as quickly as you can using the 5DSr. And we're gonna do some tests once the actual camera comes out, like the actual production model comes out. We'll give it a test and see how it performs. But so for $700, okay, so you get 2 memory card slots on the 5DSr. You get 1 slot. That might be maybe one advantage that the 5DSr has over the A7R II. Is it worth $700? Not to me. That sounds kind of crazy to spend $700 to get an extra slot on your camera. I don't know. So again, I just kind of racked my brain. Really, the only thing that that kind of makes this price tag kind of sort of on paper make sense is the fact that it's 50 megapixels and there are no other DSLRs that do that. So there's going to be a lot of people that maybe already are in Canon's camp in terms of they own their lenses and stuff, other gear, that will buy the 5DSr just based off of that. Just the fact that, oh, well, my camera has the highest resolution that's available right now. But in every other respect, and I dare say that if I have the 5DSr and I have the A7R II in the same conditions, same settings, for me as a studio portrait photographer, you're gonna have a very hard time telling the difference. I mean, I did this test when I first started with the A7 II and the 5D Mark III, and that was one of my initial tests that I did, and I found very little difference between the two, other than the way that Canon renders colors, which when you're photographing people, it kind of makes people look a little more red on the Canon side. And that was even something that was different with Nikon. The way that Nikon renders skin tones compared to Canon is different. The way that Sony renders skin tones compared to Canon is different. Can it be modified in Photoshop? Absolutely. Even though the skin tones were the way they were coming out of the Canon 5D3, I still ended up changing them in post-production with Photoshop. So, you know, it's one of those things where out of the camera, you might feel like the skin tones look a certain way, but in post-production, it doesn't matter. You're going to change all of that stuff anyway, and then you make it look the way you want it to look. So with that being said, I can't justify a $700 difference when, number one, you can mount Canon lenses, Leica lenses, old school Minolta lenses, Voigtlander, Mitacon. There are so many different, on top of your actual Sony native full frame E-mount lenses and the old, not the old, but the regular E-mount lenses as well. All of these lenses all fit, and I keep hearing this argument that, well, it's going to take a little while, you know, it has to develop, blah, blah, blah. You can put all these lenses on the camera as soon as the camera comes out. Like, you can use that. So the lens thing, to me, again, it's a moot point, because you can use all of those lenses on the A7R II and still have autofocus. And in manual focus, for a lot of these lenses, you have focus peaking, which is something that in a future video I'm gonna actually show that, because I tell people all the time, oh yeah, you know, when I first started I used Canon lenses on my A7 II, and they said, oh, did you have autofocus? And I said, no, I didn't have autofocus, I had manual focus. And they're like, why would you do that? How do you do that? Because shooting manual focus on a, you know, DSLR like a D800 or a 5D3 or a 5DSr, it is very difficult to get things in focus. But with focus peaking, it is way easier to actually focus manually than it is at some points focusing with autofocus. And again, this is something that's a future video, but again, the big advantage, $700 less, I can use all of those different lenses, plus all the native lenses that are coming out and that are out for Sony right now. You have the electronic viewfinder on the A7R II, which a lot of people don't understand how it works until you actually use it. And the fact that when you look through the viewfinder and you have a little TV that you can see everything, you can zoom into it to make sure that your eyes are in focus, that you know, you just see a lot more. You could see in the dark quite a bit better using the electronic viewfinder. It's just a pleasure to use compared to the optical viewfinder. And it's just one of those things that you just have to use it to really understand how that works. So the electronic viewfinder that you get in the A7R II is improved as well. The other thing is Wi-Fi. You have Wi-Fi built into the A7R II, which I can't tell you how many times I've had the camera. I'm out, for example, in New York, taking pictures, and I want to share a picture, and let's say I don't want to go and take my memory card out as I would in a 5DSr. I'd have to have a laptop with me, you know, load up the picture, convert it from RAW to JPEG, do some color adjustments, all that kind of stuff, and then upload it. With my A7 II and with the A7R II, when it comes out, you have Wi-Fi built in. So you can actually transfer your photos from the A7R II to your cell phone, you know, which has the data network built in. I can open up any type of mobile apps like Lightroom, Visco, all the other apps that are available out there to edit photographs. And you can apply filters and make all kinds of changes to it and then upload it to the web straight from your camera and your phone, as opposed to having to go through a laptop. So it's just, the Wi-Fi is a big deal. And yeah, you can get Wi-Fi on the 5DSr. There is an extra attachment that you can buy for it to be able to allow it to do that. But who wants to spend extra money? You already spent $3,900 for the camera body, and now you're going to have to spend several hundred more to get Wi-Fi. Again, I just don't get it. I mean, they can do it because they're Canon and because there's a lot of people that just don't know any better, and they'll buy into it just because it's the latest and greatest. So Wi-Fi is a big deal. The silent shutter on the A7R II, very, very exciting. Being able to take a picture and not hear the actual shutter sound, completely silent, just like it was on the Sony A7S, that's a big, big deal. And there's a lot of people, street photographers and wedding shooters, that are going to be very interested in just that feature alone, on top of all the other stuff that the camera offers. The silent shutter is something that will definitely come very, very handy for a lot of different shooters, and you don't have that option at all on the 5DSr or really any of the other Canon cameras. The shutter is what it is. And then just another thing, you know, you do have the tilt screen on the A7R II, which does come in handy. I use it all the time. Shooting shots that are very low, I can tilt the screen. If I'm shooting up above people, I can hold the camera above me and tilt the screen down. And so definitely the tilt screen comes in handy. There's a ton of other features that I could just go on and on and on about, but you know, just to keep this, because I feel like, let's see, how long? I've been talking for a little while. So just to kind of wrap things up in a bow, again, $700 difference. You're getting the A7R II for $31.99 compared to $38.99 for the Canon 5DSr. And essentially on paper, the only two things that I could really say that you're getting over and above is higher resolution by this much, as you can see in the diagram, and getting dual card slots, which again is not that big of a deal for most people. We've been used to shooting with a single card slot for many, many years, And I think with all of the other advancements that you have with the A7R II, it is and I hate to say this because people say it all the time, but it really is like a game changer in terms of what we can expect out of mirrorless cameras today and in the future. So again, hopefully you found some of this information helpful. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of really exciting stuff coming up, especially if you're a Sony user. There's a lot of exciting stuff that's going to be coming up soon, and I wish I could talk about it now, but I have to keep it under wraps for a little while longer. But there's going to be future videos, reviews for the A7R II. You're going to see a lot of informational content that will hopefully answer any questions that you guys have about the camera, so that when you go out to buy it, that you know and feel comfortable that it's going to do exactly what you want it to do and then some. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Again, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check out some of my future videos. They will definitely be a lot more polished and a little bit more direct. You know, today, this video, I just wanted it to be kind of an off-the-cuff type of video. And so thank you again for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you next time.